All right, hey everybody. This is a video. This is the note sheet that was on the Google Classroom. This is me graphing them. And so I already wrote this in here. It says the vertical shift changes the midline of a graph. And so we have been doing graphs where the midline has been 0. And so we've centered everything around the x-axis. Now it's going to be centered around something different. And so it's going to shift it up or down some. And so we'll fill in stuff here and then we'll start graphing. I started this one because in full disclosure, I started to make a video and then realized it was upside down. So I stopped and started again. So you didn't have to watch this upside down. And so we have that the amplitude is 2. The frequency is the number that's in front of x. Here the frequency is just 1. We don't write that 1, but the frequency is 1, which means between 0 and 2 pi, we're going to get 1 complete curve. The period is always going to be 2 pi divided by the frequency. Of course, 2 pi divided by 1 is 2 pi. The period tells you how long it takes to get 1 complete curve. So it works with the frequency. Frequency is how many curves we get between 0 and 2 pi. Period is how long it takes to get 1 curve. The vertical shift. So the vertical shift is that it's going, this minus 1 right here means it's going to be going down 1. Which means our midline is an equation. It's always a y equals are horizontal. So it's a y equals, and it's going to be this, y equals -1. So if I ask you for a midline, that is an equation, okay? It's going to be y equals because it's horizontal. I always do the midline first. I go ahead and make a dotted line at that midline so that I can kind of emphasize that a little bit. Fix that one, it's kind of low. So I darken that, and then this is probably a bad idea, but so that you can see it better, I'm gonna try to use a color here, and hopefully I don't mess it up. We'll see. I try not to use pens with this, but I think you'll be able to see it a little bit better. And so again, like I've said before, I always graph the first point and the last point of a curve first. So it's not shifted left or right at all. It's just right there at 0. So it's going to start at 0. Now this is a sine, which means it starts on the midline. So at x equals 0, it's going to be on the midline. So what's different there is we were putting them always at the x-axis, but now you put them on your midline. Okay. And then it's going to also end on its midline. Now it takes to 2 pi to get 1. So one of them is going to end at 2 pi. I'm just going to draw one first and then we'll draw the other one. Okay, so these are my beginning and my end. I know to put it at 2 pi because the period is 2 pi. The period tells you how long it takes till it ends. Okay, for a sine, in the very center, it's going to cross its midline. The middle of 0 and 2 pi is pi. So at pi, it's going to cross its midline. In between the beginning and the middle, that middle point is where it's going to go up. Now the amplitude is 2, so it's going to go up 2 from the midline. It's not going to go up to the number 2. Okay, it goes up 2 from the midline. So if you're at -1 and you go up 2, you go 1, 2, that puts you at 1. In between the middle and the end, it's going to be down at its low point. It's 2 down from the midline. So if you're at -1, 2 down from that is -3. So if you connect these, remember you have to make it curved. You have to add that curvature. There's one complete sine curve. Now we need to fill the graph always. So we're going to do this again. It goes to 4 pi. So that means there's room for a second one because then we have 2 pi left. So it's going to start at 2 pi. It's going to end at 4 pi. In the very center, it's going to cross its midline. In between the beginning and the middle, it's going to be up at its high point. In between the middle and the end, it's going to be down at its low point. Once you have 1, everything else is just kind of based on that. Make sure you connect it with a curve. Make sure you make it neat. My first curve is a little bit better than my second curve. It's kind of straight right here, but you get the idea. Okay, it would keep going. You're welcome to extend it past there if you want to. You don't have to. You could stop it right at 4 pi. All right, let's look at the second one. The second one is y equals 1/2 theta minus 0.5. So the amplitude is just 1. There's nothing in front of cosine. There's just a 1 there. We don't write the 1. And so the amplitude is 1. The frequency is this 1/2 right here. Now we did talk about how sometimes they'll write it as theta over 2. So you just need to know that those are the same thing. So the frequency is 1/2, which means between 0 and 2 pi, we're going to have half of a curve. So if between 0 and 2 pi, we only have half of a curve, how long does it take to get a full curve? 4 pi, because half of it is at 2 pi, so we would have to double that. So if you did 2 pi divided by 1/2, you do get 4 pi. Okay, so you can do the math, or like I said last time, some of you are just going to get it. Some of you are just going to be able to convert that fraction, thinking about it logically and not having to really think about the fraction. The vertical shift is whatever is happening here. It's negative, so this is going to be down, oops, not down, negative 0.5, down 0.5 or 1/2. The midline then, remember, is an equation, so it's going to be at y equals negative 0.5. The midline is always an equation, a y equals equation. It's a horizontal line. So this scale is by 0.5, so that makes it a little bit easier. So I'm going to make a midline. I'm going to put a dotted line at negative 0.5. I'm going to try to use a pen again. I did okay on that first one, so we'll see if I get this one right. Okay, this one starts, there's a couple of ways you could do it. I'm going to think about it as the period. It takes 4 pi to get a whole one. So it's going to start at 4 pi or 0 and end at 4 pi. That's going to, based on our period, that will give us one complete curve. This is a cosine, which means it starts high. Cosine starts up at its high point. The amplitude is 1. If you're at negative 0.5 and you go up 1, that is positive 0.5. Okay, so these are scaled differently than the top one. So you have to pay really close attention to how your axis is scaled. These are going, every 2 lines is 0.5. Okay, so be careful, it's different than the first one. So if we're at negative 0.5 and we go up 1, that's going to be positive 0.5. At the end, at 4 pi, it's going to be up at its high point again. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that point as well. Now the center, in the center for a cosine, it's going to be at its low point. So the center between 0 and 4 pi is 2 pi. So if you're at 0.5 and you go down 1, because your amplitude is 1, you would be at negative 1.5. In between the first and, the beginning and the middle is where cosine is going to cross the midline. So at pi, it's going to cross the midline. At the end over here, in between the middle and the end is where it's going to cross the midline. So the middle between 2 pi and 4 pi is 3 pi. This looks like a V. It's not a V. We are graphing key features. So what's happening in between there, if we plugged in a bunch of points, is we're getting a curve. So you have to add that in. And this curve is really wide because it's like it's stretched out. This normally, a normal cosine would have stopped here at 2 pi, but this one stretched all the way to 4 pi. So you have to really get that curve in there. You do lose points, okay, if it's not neat and if it doesn't have the curve, okay? I'm gonna go through the next two a little bit more quickly just so you can see them. You're obviously welcome to slow down or pause or stop the video, whatever you need to do if it's too fast. Okay, this next one is y equals negative 3 sine of 2 theta plus 2. The amplitude is 3. It is a negative in front. Remember, we talked about how that's separate. The amplitude is just the number. The negative does its own thing. So the negative makes it upside down. So we'll get to that when we get there. The frequency is the 2 right here. The period is 2 pi divided by 2, which is just pi. Okay, remember the frequency is how many complete curves you get before you get to 2 pi. So we will have 2 complete curves by the time we get to 2 pi, which means it took pi units to get one curve. The vertical shift is going to be up 2. We've got a plus 2 at the end here. So that means the midline, remember the midline is an equation, is at y equals 2. So I'm going to put a dotted line at y equals 2. Okay, this one's a little bit different because it has that negative out front. You do everything else the same except it's upside down. Okay, so this is a sine. Sine starts at the midline. It's still going to start at the midline even if it's negative. So it takes pi, excuse me, to get a complete curve. Let's do one curve and then we'll fill the rest in. So if I'm at pi, I'm going to be on my, or I'm at sine, I'm going to be on my midline at 0 and pi. This is where it stops and starts. Okay, pi in the very center, pi touches its midline. None of that changes even when it's upside down. Here's where it's different. The amplitude is 3, but it has a negative out front. So normally a sine would go up first. This one's going to go down first. So if I'm at 2 and I go 3 down from there, that's going to be -1. I'm going down first because this negative right here. That negative out front, as you know, flips it across the x-axis. In this case, flips it across its midline. And then it's a reflection. And then in between the middle and end, it's going to go up. So if you're at 2 and you go up 3, that's going to be 5. So if we connect these with the curve, you get something like this. So here's your upside down sine curve. But we need to go all the way to 4 pi. You always want to fill the graph. Excuse me. And so we're going to go, sorry, I'm going to draw the rest of the points and then connect them at the end. So it takes 1 pi to get a full one. So this one starts at pi, so it's going to end at 2 pi. Its middle is at 3 pi over 2. It's going to go down here in the middle to -1 and up here to to 5. I'm just following the pattern. Okay, so you could draw this in. You could draw them as you go, or you could draw them all together at the end. The next one, this one starts at 2 pi, so it's going to end at 3 pi. In the very center of those 2 points, it's going to be at its midline. It's going to go in the middle of these two down to -1. In the middle of these two, it's going to go up to 5. Oh, I had a little too much curve right there. Okay, and then the last one is going to start at 3 pi and end at 4 pi. It's going to cross in the middle at 7 pi over 2. In between those points, it's down at -1. In between these points, it's up at 5. And again, you could have gone and done all those points. I mean, that's not great right there. And connected them all at the end with one long curve. Okay. Like I said, I'm going through these last couple a little bit fast, so if you need to pause or slow down and write it, you are welcome to do that. The last one, y equals 1/2 cosine x minus 4. The amplitude is the 1/2. There's just a 1 in front of this x, and so the frequency is 1. So between 0 and 2 pi, we're going to get one complete graph. So 2 pi divided by 1 is, of course, 2 pi. The vertical shift, it's negative, so this one is going down 4, which means our midline is at -4. Remember, the midline is an equation, so it should be y equals -4 every time it's an equation. Okay, so we need the whole thing. So I'm going to put a point midline. These are, look at your scale, okay, so be careful. Don't always compare it to the one before. The scales are different. I'm going to make a dotted line at -4. It's a cosine, and it's not negative out front, so it's not upside down. It's up at its high point. And so, I'm sorry, it's at its high point at the beginning. And so it's going to start at 0 and end at 2 pi. And so it's going to be up. So if we're at -4 and we have to go up 0.5, we're going to be here at -3.5. So it's going to start and stop at -3.5. In between those two is pi. It's down at its low point. So if I'm at -4 and I have to go down down 0.5, I'm at -4.5. And in between the beginning and the middle is where it's going to cross. In between the middle and the end, it's going to cross its midline. I'm going to go ahead and get all the points for this one and then connect it all at the same time. I can fit one more because I still have 2 pi left, which is the period, so I can get one more complete one. So here at 4 pi, it's going to be up at its high point, which we already know is -3.5. Here at 3 pi, it's going to be down at its low point, which is -4.5. Then here at 5 pi over 2 and at 7 pi over 2, it's going to cross. So your dots should look really evenly spaced out. So again, I know it looks like triangles, but it's not. You only have some points. If we could graph endless points, you would see the curve. So we have to add that curvature in. Will you lose points if you don't make it curved? You absolutely will, because you have to have it graphed neatly and correctly means curves. And you can see I just kind of connected them all at once. Okay, if you still have questions, please feel free to let me know. I do recommend maybe watching the videos again. It's really hard for me to explain how to do it in words if I'm just typing to you. And so I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to help you. But if you need to look at how to graph them, I highly recommend trying to watch the videos again, because it's just hard to spell it out in words. It's easier just to watch. So, but let me know if you have any questions.